for the opportunity to lead the discussion this evening. It is my prayer that the Lord himself will speak to us so that we will understand and hear him in a unique way. All of us can testify nowadays the contemporary moral controversies here in America. We can talk about on issues on sexuality, and those of us in the Methodist movement, we can talk about this issue of homosexuality and then heterosexuality, which has even split the United Methodists. That now we have the Global Methodists based on some of their social principles. I think in the previous elections, we realized that one of the key influence on the elections was about issues about abortion. And these issues of sexuality has also led to gender identity and all other things. Aside these issues on religion, when we come to the scientific world also, we can talk about issues relating to AI. And then in the medical field, we can talk about assisted suicide. So all these issues brings out ideas about what role the society will play, but also the church as well. So I have a question, and my question is simple. Who shapes our moral values today? Who shapes our moral values today? Is it about the individual? Is it about the church? Is it about the culture we find ourselves, the government, the media, personal preferences, and a lot we could go on and list and list and list. So who shapes our moral values today? Because if we are going to look at how we will build these moral values in liberal culture, then the question remains, who shapes it? Now, let me just take a brief overview of some of the key terms that will help us in this context. They are words we easily understand, but I'm just highlighting them in the context of our discussion today. And one of them is the church, ecclesia. That is what the Greek translation tells us, which is simply assembling of believers. That is people of one faith coming together. And so in our context, we are talking about community where believers who comes together to proclaim God's truth. That is, they testify to the kingdom of Christ. And that is what we call the church. So it is talking about individuals in a particular chapel coming together. When we come together, then we form the church. Then we look at moral values. Now, the moral values here we are talking about, in general context, we are talking about principles that will guide judgment about what is wrong and what is right. And so those principles that determine what is wrong and what is right is what shape our behavior. And that is what influences this value system we are talking about. But when you come to the Christian perspective, from the Christian perspective, we see right or wrong grounded in what we call scripture. And so John Wesley, we would normally call him as a man of one book, sola scriptura, and that is the Bible. And then the liberal culture we are talking about is, in the general term, a society or a community or a nation that puts much emphasis on individual freedom. And so it's like the person has a free will to do whatever he or she wants to do. That is why we term it as liberal. The conservative will say, no, this is how we do it. And so we cannot change it. This is how it must be. And so when we bring all these together and we say we are building up a moral value in a liberal culture, then what we are saying is that we are going through a certain kind of process. So it is not just a one-time event, but it's a lifelong process. It is step by step, stage by stage. something that we come together, and that's with a vision. We are aiming at a particular thing. And that is what we are doing, is that we are developing a kind of principles, virtues, attitudes, reasons, activities that will cause us to be more of responsible citizens or a responsible Christian when we come to our context perspective. So in general, what we are going to go deeper, or I would say the thesis of our whole discussion today, is that a liberal culture depends on freedom. But what we are talking about today is that freedom will flourish only when it is accompanied by moral responsibility. So the liberal culture gives us freedom. But how will it flourish? It will only flourish when we have certain moral values that guides it. And so I started with a question that who shapes our moral values? And in the broader terms, it's combined effort. That is families, educational institutions, faith communities, and faith-based communities. I'm referring to a Christopher. You know, if I'm using a general perspective of faith-based community, especially when we are working on interdisciplinary approach in the field of human rights, we focus, when we talk about faith-based, we mean Islam and all other religions, we bring them together. But with our context here, I'm making reference to Christianity. We have the government, the civil society, and individuals. And so I've brought in a quote that is usually attributed to J.C. Watts. And he says that character is doing right and when no one is looking. It's in these moral values here, we are saying that the individual plays a key role because character is doing the right and when no one is looking at you. So now let's go deeper into understanding the liberal culture in the context of United States. Now, our topic is broad. And as we go, I'm narrowing it more to the United States because of where we find ourselves, and then to our Christian faith, the Christopher. And we all know just 2 days ago, and the United States celebrated the 250 years of independence. And this is a confirmation that United States is one of the world's oldest constitutional democracies. And we all testify that it is founded upon principles of liberty, individual rights, religious freedom, and the rule of law. Now, these ideas have created an environment where people enjoy unprecedented freedom to think, believe, worship, and express themselves. And law in the Ghanaian context, you will see that even when you study the Ghanaian constitution, we have similar thing in our Ghanaian context. This freedom is there. Yet freedom also raises profound moral questions. And that is it. That is, in a society where individuals are free to define truth for themselves, and that is where the basic underlying state is. In a community where free or we decide to define truth for themselves, who shapes our moral compass? What role does the church play when the culture increasingly values personal autonomy over objective moral standards? Now, let me take you back a little bit to historical context when we are dealing with some of these issues. The church as a whole, not in America, but I'll come to the American context. The church as a whole has been one of the instruments or one of the institutions that has helped nations grow and develop. And when you come to the American context, America also has that long history when it comes to faith-based institutions and how they influence education, civic behavior, and then also issues of slavery and all those things. And if you look at it clearly, even the most of these big-time institutions are linked to faith-based. Yeko Ghana, we could testify of so many high schools. All the strong and good high schools all Ghana in Iran are faith-based. You can talk about the Augustines, the Fantipims, the Wesley Girls, the Presec, the Aquinas, and Pope Jones, and Prempre, and OAS, and all those things. You see that they are all faith-based. Either they relate to Methodism, Catholic, Anglican, or Presby system. And here in America, we have similar pattern there. When you go to Emory, you will see that Candler is affiliated to UMC. When you go to Duke's, you will see that this divinity has UMC link. When you go to Princeton, you will see that it has the Presbyterian link. In today's school scene, tells us how the Christian faith has been able to influence how the nation grows and develops. Aside that, movements such as the abolition of slavery, the temperament movement, and the civil rights movement all highlights the church's capacity to act as a moral compass. And we can talk of abolition, slavery, issues of slavery, and we could testify to John Wesley's several notes he wrote with effect of abolishing slave trade. And the church has played a key role, the Christian faith has played a key role in these issues of civil rights, and then all these things, like I said, these historical precedents provide us a framework for understanding how contemporary churches might engage with societal ethics while confronting a culture that is increasingly spectacularly religious curiosity. And the Akoduin making reference to these churches, church history, how the church has related to education, slavery, hospital, and all those things in Inaro. It should lay a foundation for us as a church. Should be able to now see how we could help build moral value in a liberal culture. And already, we have historical precedent that lays a foundation for us. If we don't, as a stepping stone, we are dwelling on what I usually terms as past glory. And we can boast that we have this, but the question is now, what are we doing? Now, how do we do it? And so I'm using the historical context as a basis for us to know that we have something we could stand on, something that could serve as a precedent. But before that, and I want us to understand that this issue of liberal culture we are talking about, because it provides individual freedom of religion and speech, equality before the law, diversity and pluralism, protection of individual rights. And then there's an idea about relativism, that is truth, my truth or objective truth. And what I'm saying is that the liberal culture we find ourselves have produced remarkable achievements that we cannot run away from it. We need to accept that it has produced a kind of freedom for us. And it has then listed most of them, the scientific advancement, economic opportunity, equal protection, dignity under the law. All these are what the liberal law has produced for us. However, liberal culture presents moral challenges, and that is where we are going to go a little bit deeper into it. I'll list some of them here. Now, and we have so many positive things, and as Christians, we should be able to appreciate these freedoms because they allow the church to worship openly. They allow the church to evangelize freely. Because I think there was, is it a Scotland or one of the United Kingdom, some few months ago, somebody went out to do evangelism and he was arrested. So when we come to American context, we have not yet started experiencing that. And so it's an opportunity for us to evangelize freely, engage society without state control, and all those things. But like I said, it produces a kind of what I said, moral challenges. And one of them is ethical diversity, pluralism and ethical diversity. Although the multiplicity of worldviews challenges the church to articulate moral positions that are both faithful to doctrine and sensitive to diverse perspective. And that's one of the key challenges this liberal community is giving us. We have several worldviews now. Into the church in a position, whilst are very faithful to the Christian faith and to the doctrine, or they are very sensitive also to the other views, because we want to win them, because we want to build a good environment that we all live. Another aspect also has to do with secularization of public life. Legal and social norms often prioritize individual freedoms and autonomy over traditional ethical frameworks. And what this is doing is that it is gradually diluting the church's influence on public policy and cultural habits. And now, because the church is not transforming the world is now transforming the church. And we embrace it in the church in the name of fashion or those things, and at the end of the day, we see the world in the church controlling the church, and the church rather moving from its sacred place, rather towing to the path of the world because of secularization of public life. And issue of moral relativism on a my truth and objective truth. Which one do we go for? Because we are in a liberal culture. Then we come an aspect of consumerism. And some few weeks ago, I was talking to some group of people, and I was telling them that even the Christian faith, our worship, has become more of consumerism than theocentric. The point is, always the basis is, what am I going to get? What am I going to get? What am I going to get? But what do I also give to God? And when all these things comes together, at the crowd affecting the biblical truth is challenged. There's declining when it comes to biblical literacy. And as soon as those things occurs, politics, people don't trust institutions again. And then materialism, sexual perversiveness, and all those things comes into play. Today, institutions are declining in enrollment, not because people are no longer interested in education, but because people's focus is that if I go to school and I finish, it is the job I'm going to look for. It is money I need. And if there's some money is coming, then there shouldn't be any place for me when it comes to school, institutions, and all those things. And freedom without moral responsibility can eventually become moral confusion. And we have to now, the church must now help us to control the kind of freedom we are having. Because this kind of freedom has even given us identity crisis when it comes to issues of gender and other. So the question here is, why moral values matter? And one of them is our personal development. When we are educating people to understand why moral values matter, we need to let them understand that, first of all, it is for the individual's personal development. So if you don't guide your eating habits right now, at the end of the day, they will force you to eat what you don't want to eat. It's a clear example. Issues of morality are here. We have to let the person understand that if I enter into a kind of sexual lifestyle, let me use a male, and I want to have a sexual affair with my colleague male, Benyina miyimi yanku benyina da. Yaman tells it only freedom. By the end of the day, no one care for Bobo Pampers. Into once the person has his own freedom, we should let also the person understand and appreciate the challenges and the effects of them. But when we focus on the I had a America, your freedom, we are the open obey, but we don't educate the person to understand that there is that is what it goes. So moral values matter not only because we want the church to grow, no, but we want individuals themselves to also develop integrity, self-discipline, responsibility, honesty, compassion. All these things comes into play. And when an individual develops, we begin to have what we call healthy family. Because if I don't grow myself well, if I don't develop myself well, what happens at the end of the day is that I bring my burdens to the family, and then ebusiano afi obre obot ebusiano do. And as soon as a family struggles, I'm telling you that the community struggles. And so there will be nothing that we call social stability. Let me give you a critical example. If what we do in our organizations, it was men's fellowship, it was women's fellowship, it was MYF, it was choir, singing band, good. Activities are yet to if we translate the same thing into the church, we will see how the church will flourish. It is easy for the church to grow. Another example is look at when the class system in Methodism was very strong. The church was growing. In such a way, these small families, these small entities, has a key role in building the church and building our lives. It's the same way when we talk about moral values, it matters there because that is where it brings stability. And at the end of the day, it brings growth in the whole nation as a whole. Into freedom without responsibility can weaken the democratic institutions and then public trust. In the moral issues, we are saying that it has a key role it is playing in sustaining the liberal culture we are having. When we don't protect and we don't guard against it, at the end of the day, the trust in the public system will lose focus. So now at this moment, let me quickly go a little bit into the sources of our moral formation. Like I said from the beginning, it is not one person. We have the family, because my class one definition of family, also family is the basic unit of life. Only in Kwana Farabai. So if family doesn't exist, at the end of the day, no life exists. Then we have the schools and universities, they have a role to play. We have faith communities. On American, we have churches and all of them. And here I'm making reference to Christianity. Then we have the government and institutions, and we have individual responsibilities as well. So the mechanism here is, like I said earlier, one is about education and formation. Education and formation. And when I talk about education and formation, let me start from the church. For example, the Sunday school. There's something I have seen. I'm still thinking on it. I was even talking to a colleague that even if it's possible to do a write-up. I was talking to one person, the rate at which we appreciate children have control. Children can push parents to do what they don't want to do. Assuming we have a very good environment for children ministry, an outstanding Sunday school. Do you know that child can force the parents to come to church every Sunday?
Yeah.
Because with that authority in such a liberal culture, Opedo okay diagram, I made the number call, Opedo okay, I made the number call. If we are creating a Sunday school environment whereby that children will have that flair and the desire to always be present, I'm assuring you that the adult church will also be full. Because the parents will be forced to come to church just because of that child. So education and formation is one of the key ways. And so the point I'm saying is that if we have that environment, and at the end of the day, no say abofraba bachapo, now that is where we can begin to teach them. And that is where our motto at Sunday school comes in. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So now, just do a critical analysis. Visit these American churches here, Uruguay. It is not only about issue of sexuality in Egon, but it's about issue of formation right from the beginning. They had their burdens, but how was their Sunday school system handled? Most of us will talk about Sunday school, so we come back and we say that how is it handled now? So education and formation is one of the key ways we will do that. Then we have what we call community leadership. Growing up, I realized that in one of our law and politics class, and then I had a conversation with my professor, and he made a certain statement, and in a summary of the statement is this. And I will post also for a bone that will watch what you need in Womanoma in a intro Calvary, Denver, Nanonka Kaunadi. You will see that he will write the name of the community. Because we don't only post you to the Methodist people, but we post you to the whole community to go and serve. Now, community leadership, church leadership can model and advocate ethical behavior in public and private spheres, which can bridge doctrinal teachings with practical actions. So when people see you, they believe you and they try to follow you to see what you are doing. And then we have social engagement and advocacy, and then dialogue across culture. Maybe church aspects now, I'll be hammering on some of these things. I would rush through a bit, and then we move on to the church aspects. Now let's go to the church sector, because I said I'll be narrowing on the church. So now let's look at the context of the church now. I've already mentioned a lot about the church, but now I'm making it more specific. So we see that the church does not invent morality. What do I mean by this? What I mean is that its moral teachings are rooted in God's revelation. And scripture teaches that God is the ultimate source of truth. When we read Psalm 119, verse 105, it's a very popular passage, especially those of us who have been with Scripture Union. Also, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. And John 14:6 will declare that I am the way, the truth, and the light. No one comes to the Father except me. Out of the American United, the church therefore understands morality not as a changing social preferences, but as a participation in God's design for human flourishing. The 10 commandments, the teachings of Jesus, and the command to love God and neighbor provide enduring moral principles. And I've listed some examples here. For example, the church as light and salt, the church as pillar and foundation, the church as a disciple making, the church for transformation, not confirmation. And if you remember, I think about 2-3 years ago, that was our theme. And Romans 12:1-2. And speaking the truth in love. And this is where I will now dive a little bit deeper to the church's role in guiding moral values. I used to tell my men's fellowship when I was in Tema that they are the conscience of the society. And so if they don't exist, they should understand that the church will struggle. But here, what I want to say is that the church here becomes the moral conscience of the society. You know, throughout history, the church has often served as the society's moral conscience. Now, I'm not saying that the church is controlling the government, no. But what I mean is that it reminds the society that freedom must be guided by justice, by compassion, by truth, and human dignity. Only thing about from those of who are into history, you realize that we had only 3 jobs: the lawyer, the doctor, and the pastor. Look at those 3 professions and look at how they dress. You see some kind of similarity there. So the church was there to heal. In the doctor, it's not first started from the church, especially those in the European system, Germany area. So many churches were deeply involved in this slave trade and and how it will be abolished. When society loses its moral direction, the church must courageously speak truth, but with humility and love, because you want to position the church, the community well. On Instagram, you see the first example: you are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world. However, the churches has its own challenges. Let me touch on some challenges before I move on. One of the main challenges of the church is secularization, and made in Kenya. Consistently, it's becoming something in the church. You know, sometimes you see a lay preacher preaching, Besia, or a lay preacher preaching a chin, the nine, any baby, no digital pulpit's name will preach. Just because it's an American system and American culture. But as a leader and as a preacher, you forget that you are probably stepping on the toe of somebody whose faith has not grown. And by that, I'm sure you won't. But one bound in a way chapel, because the person has not grown and become so matured into. He feels that what I see in the world is the same thing I'm seeing in the church. And this cultural pressure to privatize faith influences some of those things. We also have what I've termed as internal church scandal. And one of them is abuse of authority. I'm the boss. So when I say final, we are not saying don't be firm. You need to be firm. But if you abuse authority, nobody now sees any moral value in you. So it's like you say that what moral right do you have to speak to the community if you yourself practicing the other way around? We have financial misconduct. We have political polarization. All these issues are under what I've termed as internal church scandals. So Paul will say, I planted, Apollos watered. That you go to a society and want to create party in that particular church. Another challenge the church is facing now is what I term as generational differences. Younger generations often distrust the church. We have digital culture influencing moral formation. This kind of generational differences. Gen Z, Gen X, Gen Alpha, today Gen Alpha in Arab. Do we really understand these concepts? And how do we make them more relevant to the people? Because understanding this concept will help shape this liberal society we find ourselves. And then balancing truth and grace. Balancing truth and grace. So these issues I've stated here, there are a lot, but time into I'm just mentioning these few ones. I'm saying there are challenges facing the church today. If we don't take care, what happens is that it leads to loss of credibility. Until the church loses its credibility, in this liberal world, and therefore that this liberal culture feels is better than the church, because if we don't know hold more credibility than what we see in the church. So now I come to the main focus. How does the church now help build the moral values? How? The first is proclaiming biblical truth. We have changing world, but unchanging word. The world is changing, but the word of God does not change. The method we will use to interpret the word may change, but the word itself doesn't change. And so let me speak as a biblical scholar. I have several ways I could interpret text. I can come from my sociological perspective. I can come from historical perspective. I can come from social scientific perspective. I can come from textual perspective. But the point is that the same word hasn't changed. The word still remains as it is. So the method and everything can change, but we must make sure that the word is still undiluted. And we can only do that when we teach scripture faithfully, when we defend objective moral truth as scripture tells us, and when we address ethical issues with wisdom. So what we have to do is that we must avoid silence, but we must also avoid hostility. We need to blend the two. The second thing we also have to do is forming Christian character. You know, moral values are not merely taught. They are formed through discipleship. And these are the ways the church can shape character. 1, discipleship. 2, spiritual disciplines such as prayer, worship. And there's another aspect we call Christian education, family ministry, youth formation, biblical teaching, small groups, mentorship. All these are aspects that we could embrace so that we'll be able to form Christian character with the people we find ourselves in this liberal world. So in a liberal culture, intentionally training people in these aspects, making sure that we are forming Christ-like disciples, will now help us build moral values. So the goal here is not merely producing law-abiding citizens. No, but rather we are producing people who are Christ-like disciples. So I tell married couples that if you are faithful to God, you will automatically become faithful to your wife. Say it did not correct automatically. It did not call as I kuna aware. So the church's task is to shape people into Christ-like disciples whose character will reflect integrity, whose character will reflect humility, whose character will reflect compassion and self-control. In the one that I've written a simple statement there that the church shapes people before it shapes culture. So building a moral values in a liberal world, you need to form Christian character, because if you are able to shape the people, you can shape the culture, because these people find themselves in that culture. But if you have not shaped them and they only come to church, dance and go, then forget that you are going to shape in a liberal culture. The next point is modeling moral integrity. One of the greatest responsibility of the church is moral formation. The church's credibility, for me, depends not only on what it teaches, but also upon how it lives. The credibility of the church, it is not only upon what you are teaching, but how you are living it. How do we see integrity in the leadership of the church? When it comes to accountability, do we have that transparency? Sexual purity, stewardship. These moral values plays a key role. And I insist, and I repeat again, the credibility of the church depends on its witness. not only what is standing there to speak. On the Baba signboard, it's not a direct on Crawford, the one Kobe, your own Kobe. Nobody takes you seriously. The fourth point is engaging society with compassion. People are often more persuaded by love than by arguments. The church demonstrates moral values through acts of services. For example, Yendem food pantries, homeless ministry, addiction recovery, prison ministry, refugees assistance, disaster relief, mental health support. All these issues are one way the church can engage the society. And this is where we would see the coordinating office of social services playing a key role. Addiction recovery and mental health support has been one of my research interests recently. What will social service office do here? The church should demonstrate the gospel through both proclamation and service. In the first one is similar here. It is not only about proclaiming about the gospel, but we must also demonstrate it through our service. So when the church serves, it embodies the gospel. Then we have human rights, human dignity, the sanctity of life. I won't spend much time there because at the beginning, I made mention a lot on that. So let me move on to equipping Christians for public life. One challenge facing American churches is balancing faithful witness with respectful engagement. And I think it's not only in America, even in our African context, we have similar issues. The church should neither isolate itself from the society, nor simply mirror cultural trends. Like examples, the means will be dressed in a address, chapel, a modern style. Instead, I think the church should rather help believers to think biblically, theologically, about business, about politics, about education, about healthcare, about law, about media, about technology, about artificial intelligence. We should encourage our people to think critically about some of these things. They shouldn't run away from it. So the church should participate in public conversation while recognizing that the United States is religiously diverse. So we will not run away that it is diverse, but we also have to engage the public. So Christians are called to engage in public life without losing our Christian identity. We don't have to lose it, but we need to engage the public. Then the last aspect under this is strengthening marriage and family. From the beginning, I said that family is the basic unit of life. As we all know, many moral values are first learned at home. The family remains the primary place where moral values are learned. And when I was preparing this, I started asking myself that, also why is it that America? Because I realized that when it comes to issues of strengthening marriage and family system in the church, it's like I have not played a critical role there at all. I visited my constitution and I realized that it even says that every quarter, that means once every 3 months, there should be a training on about issues of marriage and family life. So when I was preparing this, and I visited church constitution, but this is also an opportunity for me to now think through to see that I need to revisit certain things that could help my church to grow. So one of the ways I could build moral values in this liberal culture as a minister and at the same time as a lay and at the same time as a member of the church is that I need to strengthen marriage and family life. Those who are preparing for marriage, how do we prepare them? Do we wait when there's time for marriage before we prepare them? Or from time to time, do we even bring these young people to start a dialogue with them about marriage? What about faithfulness in marriage? Let's put marriage preparation aside and let's come to marriage itself. Do we really talk about faithfulness in marriage? What about responsible parenting? What about family counseling? What about respect between generations? Care for the children, care for the elderly. In a liberal culture where family structures are diverse and often under pressure, I think that the church can provide support, counseling, mentoring, and community to such families. And so this is how I end it. I say that healthy families strengthen healthy communities. And at the same time, healthy churches also build healthy families. So if the family is not healthy, the church is not healthy. If the family is not strong, the church is not strong. So that is how it is. So in summary, I'll put them under 4 key points. The first point is we need to teach. The second point is we need to form, we need to witness, and we need to transform. And I believe that when we do these things, it is really going to help us as a church to be able to help build moral values in a liberal culture. So it is a call on to us as a church to navigate the tension between adhering to the historical moral teachings and then adapting to the social realities in a liberal culture. And this requires an approach that is both pastoral and also one that is more about dialogue, because it will help us emphasize human values and then also respect individuals' freedom. And I believe that when we do that, and if we're able to contextualize, there will be a way out for us to be able to address these social issues whilst remaining credible and not losing our credibility as a church. I'll pause here for comments, questions and answers, contributions, suggestions before we end everything. So, Dr. Santi and Dr. Inchi, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Sofo. At this point, we are inviting comments and or questions. Nobody?
Brennan, whilst other people are preparing their questions, Sofo, thank you so much for this powerful delivery. I believe it's something that as a church we always tend we don't give it much attention when it comes to how we are interlacing with the society. So for kind of idea about but when we are handling our young ones, at times we hear it a lot when the young ones in church and they start telling you the way your church is, the way what's the way I'm saying we hear it at parents, and we look on it helplessly because we don't know how to really change trends to make sure, say, in the future, these ones are established in the church. And also, there are times that we even start battling things that we don't even have enough information or knowledge about. These kids are being shaped out with maybe a social media, TikTok, other things. We don't even know what they are watching out there. For us to even plan these rebuttals and how we can redirect them to get the right moral values in place. And there may be something you say, as a church and our experience, how do we really handle this? Does it mean say you a TikTok account? Does it mean say you find how do we even know what we are battling with? So that be a bit me, I find a way to really direct our parenting style. And as a church, what are the new ways that we can even help our children ministry? I bet me now that place be very engaging. Am I a mofra no sada be ya? Ombe feel so welcome. Say plan say yina. Ede ma habio ne beko be foforo. Impacho masem saka.
All right. Thank you so much. First, I said that America is one of the places the children will be a key factor for our church to grow. Because if you look at the kind of power, in quotes, that they have, that they can influence their parents to do things they don't even want to do. If they have a conducive environment, it is an opportunity for us. So this is where I will start from. We need to create an environment in the church that the children themselves will feel comfortable. So if I am a minister, if I am a steward, if I am a caretaker, if I am a chairman, a leader in the church, and the children do not trust me, they will not share anything with me. So the first point and where we could start is, first of all, making sure these children trust us. When they trust us, now they will be able to open up to us. And now they will be able to share what they want to share with us. And so when they go to TikTok and they see anything and they come to church, trust me, they can open up to you than even their parents. Because they trust you. You've created an environment and a system that they feel that they are trusted. So that is the first point. And that is what we should also do as a parent. So as a parent, what kind of conversation do I have with my kids? If you are not careful, and by the time you come to your senses, your children are already wayward. So as husbands and wives, how do we blend to be able to make sure that we get attention for these children at home? Because we have created a space whereby the children's first point of contact is this social media. Because as a parent, more night. By the time I'm a so throughout the night, I don't know what the child was doing. So we need to create that space as both as parents and as leaders of the church or members of the church, that these children will now have that trust in us. Secondly, when you talk about issue of timing, the greatest challenge we have, especially not even in diaspora, but in the Methodist Church as a whole, is creating the space for children to fellowship. Now, our stage, we should be able to transition the children. When we add them together, at the end of the day in Wabre, so if I have 3 classes for these children, and then I know that parents in the best spending 2 hours, na mean that abofraba or less than 5 years, ne attention span 30 minutes. What I will start is that I will start with a movie that will catch this child's attention. Then I will create in a space for this child to play before I come in again to teach the child. After teaching the child, I now open up the child up to this issue of social media. Now, I will find another site. In the adult service can still spend 2 hours, but the activities I will do at the children's ministry should be able to sustain these children, that at the end of the day, the parents will rather come and pick them there. Because let me tell you, even if you bring somebody 15 years more, but an adult service, so the church will be bored. Or it will be a boring church for the person. Then also, these children, we also, aside that also, as they are growing, we want them to enjoy the Methodist Church. We now bring in our issues, identity, class system, and I don't know. We could let them follow up, start practicing it right from that side, and start about adult service. Most of you people, you are enjoying adult service today because of catechism, because of Saturday by a Sunday school catechism, those things we were doing. So we need to create that environment for them, and then we need to create a space for them so that they will be able to worship with us. If anybody has something to add, the person can also add. The superintendent minister is also on it, so we will also give him a space to talk to us as well.
So, Mensa also kakra.
Your uncle.
In fact, Ebenezer for the wonderful presentation and the insight to many of the things that you spoke about. And like Dr. Asante was asking about our children and your response, the little I want to say is that I believe that as a church, if we really mean what we are discussing and ready to work with it, it must reflect in our commitment. And let me start with the issue of our children. I get so worried that we as parents have bought phones for the kids. And even some of the kids, we have not even bought Bibles for them, but we bought phones and iPad and all these things for them. And they are using it. Now they bring these phones to church with earpieces and earbuds in their ear, and they sit in the church with these things. I wonder when they go to school, whether they do the same thing in their classrooms with the earbuds in their ear and with their phones in their hands when the teacher is teaching. But they bring these things into the church, sit in the church playing with their phones throughout, earbuds in their ear. And I'm wondering whether, because we belong to a liberal society, that is what the order of the day should be. And lastly, I ask myself, what is the budget component that we have as a church towards these children and youth ministries? Because all of these things that you are saying boils down also on finances. Because if the children are going to watch movie, they watch movie on a TV. Our Sunday school department, do they have these facilities in terms of the TVs and in terms of the movies and all of these things, like, and the other materials that they will need, even for the younger ones, if they have to do some coloring or some, whether they have them? And I believe this is where the challenge comes from. It makes it difficult to sustain the children within the 2-hour period that as parents we are worshiping. So the children, after a while, are left unattended, and then they are out there playing, and that is it. So for me, I think one, our commitment must reflect in the budget component and the willingness and readiness to make sure this thing work. And then also, we should not be influenced by the liberal act or liberalism within the country we find ourselves, to the extent that we overlearn. Because I don't see why a child comes to church with mobile phone and come and sit in the church with a mobile phone. Sometimes you find that we, the same adults in the church, we are fidgeting with our phone.
We do the same.
We don't sit 2 hours without the phone. We go to work, and some of us at our workplace, the phones are even seized. You don't take the phone to work. It's kept in the break room. And not until 2 hours, you don't grab your phone. But yet we come to church, and within 2 hours, we cannot do without phone. We must fidget with the phone. And so how do we have the moral this thing to go and tell the children that stop fidgeting with your phone? So I don't know. But somebody go and say, America, the man what you know. America, my friend, America, so we are with that pattern. And like Doc said, I doubt these children whether they'll be interested in our church. Or whether, because the way we are going, I doubt. Also, I pause here.
Thank you. Any other comments, suggestions, or responses?
Guys, indeed.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Sofo Asibu, for this amazing presentation. Mine is not a question, but I believe that this presentation is very timely, first and foremost. And it is also time for deep or sober reflection. Because as Christians, and you said it, you hit the nail, to the wood, because as Christians, we are the light and we are the salt of the world. And even though we are living in a liberal culture, you made mention that we must not disassociate ourselves from the society because we are agents of transformation, if I should put it that way. We must not avoid engaging because we have to ensure that the truth is being told. And that is the only way it will set people free. But again, it goes down to the fact that the family made up the society or the church. And so I want to ask this question. How do we even balance our family life without of our social life in terms of our work and family in this current dispensation? How do we balance it? Because we are working, and that is good. We are working, we want money, but we don't want to work and in our pension at midnight we hear the police, we hear a news that our children are here, they are there. We cannot even sleep because perhaps maybe we have our focus was on one side, but there was no balance. So how do we balance it as Christians to ensure that we don't focus, we don't lean on one side and neglect the other side, which is equally important? So, did you get my question?
Yes, I get you. You know that if you are listening to my presentation, when I spoke about an aspect that I was saying that it really needs attention, strengthening our family system. If you remember, I made that mention. If I mentioned that aspect, and I said, okay, the truth is that this issue of children ministry a year can once that we are pointing our fingers to. We need to really start it from the parents themselves. And when I go to strengthening marriage and family, I told you that when I was preparing this note, I started asking myself several questions because I realized that this that they are not being committed and they are doing all those things. And the question is, how have we trained the adults themselves? And it quickly moved my attention to one of the strategic plan policies the church, it came from conference office about internal evangelism. But this time around, not only seeking those internal evangelism, but the point is that the families we have in the church, how well have we mentored those families? Instead, I mentioned about marriage preparation, responsible parenting, family counseling. I made mention of those issues. And the angle you are coming from, we as a church, and when I say as a church, I'm not making it specifically to a minister or lay chairman or no, but as a church as a whole, when we go for leaders meeting, what policies can we now put in place that this is the way we are not able to mentor them, what both chap with them, why a day, no one can count a day, yeah, can be a yes, America, the man of the issue is that we need to also train Parents need to be disciplined. Some parents, we are not disciplined. Some parents, when we come to church 2 hours, we are fidgeting phone. And so we don't have any moral right to tell these children that they should not also touch phone. So, also for Eric, the point is we need to also look at the families we have in church. We need to also organize training. We need to also educate them. I believe that focusing on only the children, while the parent remains indisciplined, we will not bear fruit. And I agree with your submissions, but I also added that in response to your question that the parents also needs to be relooked at, needs to be coached, needs to be taught, needs to be educated. The family we have in the church, and I think it will help strengthen both our children ministry and then the adult ministry as well.
Thank you, Sofo. At this point, I would invite our steward, Sister Dr. Abba Okran, to give us the announcement.
Brethren, I will serve
The church.
Yes.
We thank the Lord for how far He has brought us. God bless you so much, our Reverend Asibu Dadzie, for always availing yourself to support the kingdom business. We are very grateful